back of the rim. Garnett on the slam. Using Curry way downtown. Oh, what a shot from Curry.
Magic and Dominique Wilkins.
Oh man, we did not want to see that. The goal in this video is to go through some players from our era that ended up in some jerseys they did not belong in. We all know the Shawn Kemp Magic photos, Ewing on the Supersonics, those nuggets of terror that are buried in history, but I want to talk about players that we grew up with that wound up on teams we currently cringe at. No particular order in this, just vibes. Starting with Tony Parker. Him on the Hornets is the second worst thing I've ever laid eyes on, right behind the Mortal Kombat movie. This man played for the Spurs from 2002 to 2018, won championships, made all-star teams, was routinely one of the best point guards in the league, and was overall just synonymous with Spurs basketball. Like, no matter what was going on in life, you would look up and see Tim, Tony, and Manu in black and white. So not only does he change to these extra vibrant colors, it's the Charlotte Hornets of all places, yuck. The worst part is, it's not even like this was so he could contend or add another championship. It just happened and he retired. You go on his basketball reference page and it's just a long repeating list until 2019, then boom, he's gone. Disgusting. Speaking of players that were supposed to stay in one jersey, can we talk about Paul Pierce on the Clippers real quick? Outside of his ESPN career, this is the most responsible for ruining his legacy. In reality, I could have gone a lot of directions with this because even though he was never supposed to leave the Celtics, he wore many different jerseys. That being said, he at least had some respectable moments elsewhere despite a fan throwing his headband back at him in Brooklyn. What makes the Clippers arc so bad though is that it was the Clippers, no further explanation needed. He was one of the many past their prime guys they had in an attempt to stack the deck for one more run at a title, and as usual, it did not work out. Yeah, he was just totally and utterly washed by this point. I think he also just played for them at a time when their jerseys were as bad as they'd been since the early days. And then that infamous moment where Draymond Green humiliated him.
Chasing that farewell tour, they don't love you like that.
By 17, by 46, is at 144.98. Victory here in Oakland.
The worst part about this was that he was kind of right. You combine this with all the talk about Paul in the recent years, and it just clouds what a great player he actually was. Imagine if his last days would have been him kissing the floor in a Boston jersey. Instead, they were spent on a flailing Clippers squad at the end of the Lob City era. This feels like an appropriate time to talk about Kevin Garnett in Brooklyn. Although he kind of righted this wrong by retiring in Minnesota, him going from reaching the pinnacle of his career in Boston to the bottom of it in Brooklyn was such a stark juxtaposition. You can even see how hard and quickly he fell off just by looking at Basketball Reference. He'd spent the previous 2 years putting together an impressive playoff rising performance against the Heat in 2012, then even making another All-Star team in 2013 despite it looking over for the Celtics. For this reason, when he and Pierce got moved to that Nets core, it seemed like they had a serious contender. Instead, he put up the absolute worst years of his career, looked old and slow, and was missing open layups by the end of it, which is when I knew it was over. It didn't help that he essentially became the go-to big as Brook Lopez missed most of the year. So what was supposed to be one more chance at a championship turned into a lackluster farewell tour as once again he and Pierce were ousted from the playoffs by LeBron James. And yeah, that boring black and white jersey does not help how we remember it. Since we're on the topic of big men that were supposed to be helping contending teams, let's examine Shaq's days in Boston. You know the face of unemployment on Twitter? Shaquille O'Neal and Green is essentially the face of washed players, or just people past their prime in any profession. That tells you all you need to know about this. However, I do want to point out that despite how it ended, they really did need him. With Kendrick Perkins recovering from ACL surgery most of the season, an actual center-sized player was crucial to extending Garnett's usefulness and the Celtics championship window. For the few games that Shaq did get to play, opponents saw significantly fewer paint touches than they did while he was out. Of course, this does little to change the fact that he looked completely out of shape, just looked flat out wrong in green after building a dynasty in purple and gold, and the experiment failed miserably. It ended with him forcing himself to come back and help out against the Heat in the playoffs, and he literally didn't make it down the floor without getting hurt, which officially sent him into retirement. It was the complete opposite of the graceful exit he deserved, the one that most legends are afforded. Thus, what was actually a serious move that was supposed to have a real impact turned into a meme and a terrible memory. Seriously, I was just looking at the time Kobe stared him down after an and one that season, and I never realized how wrong this picture looked. Kobe in a Lakers jersey still contending and competing, scowling at Shaquille O'Neal in a Celtics jersey. It feels like one of those things that would have been a random Photoshop of alternate reality if it hadn't have really happened. So if the topic is legends that deserved a graceful exit, we can't not discuss Allen Iverson. To be fair, his last game in the NBA was played with the 76ers, so I guess that softens the blow a little bit, yet it was an ugly trip to the bottom that included a stop in Memphis of all places. Yes, for 3 underwhelming games, bro was donning this weird combination of colors that I'm sure you could convince a younger fan is Photoshop. The situation is uglier than you think though. Right on brand with the controversy in his career, they parted ways because of his distaste for coming off the bench and the rebuilding project that they were undertaking. He was unhappy with that, and he'd also missed training camp with a partially torn hamstring. Due to these factors, he was almost immediately let go, but funny enough, up until this year, he was the only Memphis Grizzly player inducted into the Hall of Fame. He's now joined by Pau Gasol. Anyways, we can literally just pretend this little stint never happened and nobody's gonna check you about it. Along those same lines, Derrick Rose on the Cleveland Cavaliers. The amount of teams that he's played for post-Chicago distracts from the fact that with each one, he's had some relatively high points and has been an acceptable role player. Unfortunately, that does not apply to the Cavs stint, and there's just so much wrong with it. He looked completely off in those terrible jerseys. He was playing with LeBron, who would have been his sworn rival for years had he had stayed healthy. It was around the time we were starting to realize he would never be close to the same player again. He was also a part of that god-awful experiment of older players that made the Cavs look stacked on paper. Of course, to cap it all off, this era would end with a fairly nasty looking ankle injury, and it started to appear as if he might just retire rather than keep dealing with these challenges. After just 16 games played, he would end up traded to the Utah Jazz, who we are especially grateful that he didn't suit up for. Right over to the other guard position on that same team, good lord, Dwayne Wade. You know, I was okay with seeing him in a Bulls jersey. It was his hometown, it was still red and white, which looked pretty familiar, and that team actually showed potential when healthy down the stretch. Being on the Cavs in this particular era was just not okay. It felt like some weird bending of space-time. After he and LeBron accomplished all these great feats in Miami, here they were back where LeBron departed from, as Wade is nowhere near the same player. The season's going terribly, the jerseys still suck, this duo's memory is being tarnished. All that just for him to get sent back to Miami mid-season, where truthfully he should have never left. To this day, I just stubbornly consider him a Heat lifer. My childhood shooting guards I grew up with going out sad. I had options to choose from when it came to T-Mac, but I chose the Hawks for specific reasons. I have a great memory of watching his first game with the Knicks and thinking he was all the way back, plus the uniform looked fitting on him. Same with the Pistons. A terrible time for sure, but I always chuckle at him saying he was going to do everything in his power to bring Detroit a championship, although we knew that was impossible. And you can still find a decent highlight here and there of him in a jersey that seemed familiar. Tracy McGrady in a Hawks uniform is forgotten to the same level as Parker on the Hornets. It looked disgraceful, it was disgraceful, and I believe that was the stint that let us all know he was past the point of no return. Can you believe he was only 32 years old at this time, by the way? Injuries just totally ate him alive. He accepted his fate though. Just 2 seasons after he still apparently believed he could be the catalyst behind a title, he took a role at the very end of the Spurs bench in a desperate attempt at a ring. I was okay with it though. He finally got to play with Tim Duncan, the team was great, I felt okay with him just riding that wave. Him whoring the last of his knees out for the Hawks, we just didn't want to see that. Speaking of a star shooting guard taking his final steps on a bad team, Brandon Roy on the Wolves. The crazy thing is, I fully remember him playing more than 5 games there, but apparently that's all there was. This one is tragically sad. He'd actually retired before the 2012 season after several knee surgeries in his short career, but later said that decision was never meant to be final. He gave it one more go with the Wolves, signing a 2-year $10 million contract, but had to stop for arthroscopic surgery on his right knee almost immediately. Him playing there was literally his last breath in basketball, as he was released and never seen in the league again. It might have just been better to stay gone in 2012 instead of giving us these images. Real quick, doesn't it feel like Dwight Howard played more than 9 games in Washington? All these teams he's played for, and outside of Philly, this feels the absolute weirdest. His stint there was so short because of a gluteal injury. The timing of that was, pretty poor, if you remember the stories in 2018. My last honorary mention will be Carmelo Anthony on the Houston Rockets. Those 10 games there were the start of a very turbulent time in his career, as he was essentially used as a scapegoat, released, and couldn't find a job for around a year. It called into question his skill set, career. All in all, it was just a very unceremonious way for a player of his caliber to begin his exit from the league. And yeah, that's all I really have for this list. I'm sure there's some players out there that I missed, but my goal wasn't to get all of them, it was really just to get the ones that I had something to say about. So if there are some players that you have something to say about where they ended up in a terrible jersey somewhere near the end of their career, put it in the comment section. Also be sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the bell next to my name if you want notifications every time a new video drops. Appreciate you watching, and I'll see you all on the next one.